Well, welcome everybody. My name is Chris Dew, and I'm the PopDoc product manager. And I'm excited to spend the next half an hour with you on talking about how we access historical Dynamics NAV data right inside of Business Central. So let's get started real quick. Um, I have just a very quick agenda. We're going to discuss a couple of terms. We're going to talk about the overall migration strategy and then really spend the bulk of our time on how we see that historical data, and then again answering questions that may be there. Okay, let's dive right into it. A couple technical terms, because again, not everyone's familiar with this and hasn't been part of your vernacular necessarily every day like it has been part of mine for the last few years. But an Azure Data Lake, let's start with that one. This is simply a place to store all kinds of I'll say files. So it could be CSV files, it could be PDFs, it could be JPEGs, it could be Excel files, whatever it is. But this is where it's kind of a different paradigm than a database, right? In a database in the past where we would store our nav data, it had a table structure and everything inside of there would follow suit. And so you had to follow those rules. Well, in an Azure Data Lake, it allows us to store all this information, and we can store files next to CSV files, like I said, image files right next to CSV files. So this is a really cost-effective way for us to archive that data so that you can turn off your on-premise SQL Server at some point in time and retire that, and then still be able to access your data in the cloud. So one other thing with an Azure Data Lake, again, we're going to be talking about this quite a bit. It's really cost-effective, but it is something that's stored in the customer's Azure account, right? So all the data, they still have control over it, and it's not stored anywhere else. The other part to this, I think, that is important is this is typically whenever you're interacting with a data lake, this is typically a very heavy developer type of area. And so we've worked really hard with the tools we'll talk about today to make sure that you don't need to have a developer involved when you're either uploading all the history or again accessing it. So that brings me to the second term on here, the PopDoc Data Lake Upload Tool. This is part of PopDoc. There is not an additional charge for this tool, so you don't have to worry about anything with that. But what this does is this basically allows us to hook into our on-premise systems, extract the data, and move it to the data lake, preparing it for us to use to embed in other systems. So I think that's probably enough for the terms, but again, we're going to be talking a lot about this today, and so I want to make sure that you understand what we're getting into. Okay. Another piece, right, just kind of talking about our overall migration strategy, I think it is important as we look at this because what we are focusing on here is really the historical data access. And so this is just to be very clear, right? We are not focused on, moving over the master records, like moving over your vendors from NAV or our customers or items, accounts, those kinds of things. We aren't focused on that part. We're really focused on moving all of that data into the data lake and showing it inside of Business Central so that you can view it without needing to move all that. Because I think a lot of times people will take this opportunity to maybe restructure maybe the way that you have your accounts set up and dimensions, or again, sometimes it's just getting a clean start on something that you've been using for 20 years and saying, hey, we don't want to bring all of that information, we just want to have access to it and be able to turn off that on-premise system entirely. So no matter if you have today, like I said, an on-premise SQL server where you're hosting your nav data, if you have move that to like an Azure in the cloud, like a virtual machine running there, or even if some people have moved their SQL to Azure SQL, whatever the case may be, we have a tool for you to help you move that information and be able to access it. Again, one little bullet point to point out here is I do have Smart Connect on here. While most of our stuff today we're going to be talking about is on PopDoc, Smart Connect can be a part of your solution if you do want to move that data from nav, like I said, like the the master records, right? If you want to move those into Business Central, maybe do some transformation, whatever it is, and make those so that they actually do exist inside of Business Central, so that you can, do everything, build everything on there. Smart Connect is your tool for moving that data. Okay, so our focus now is really on accessing the history inside of Business Central, right? So we want to make sure that you have that capability without ever leaving Business Central, that you can still go back and see all of that historical NAV data. So what does that mean? Well, there's some capabilities where you might just want to see just the history that came from NAV, I should say, NAV in this case, and seeing it inside of Business Central. There's also some opportunities where you may want to see a combination of history plus the new Business Central information that is, if it's sales orders, right, you might want to see all the historical sales orders. If it's more on the payments from vendors, right, you maybe want to see it both from Business Central and from the archive, all in one list. So that is a capability of PopDoc as well. And then finally, there are some opportunities where I think it really makes sense that we actually give you a list that's much smaller than everything. It's actually embedded on the customer page or the vendor page or the account page, whatever it is, and it's pre-filtered. So it's only pulling the information for that particular customer or that particular vendor or item or account, whatever it may be. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on in the next part of this demonstration. So let me flip over. Okay, and before I go inside of PopDoc, I think I want to take you right inside of the Business Central interface. So you can see that we have PopDoc embedded right inside of here. If I click on this, what it's going to bring us to is PopDoc, which is embedded and feels native to the Business Central interface. And so if I just give you just a quick little tour here, right, this is actually pulling live purchase transactions from Business Central, but just to show you the interface, it allows us to, again, add new columns. So if I want to add those 3 columns, I'm able to, quickly pull in that information. If I want to move them around, if I wanted to, move, say, for example, the vendor, if I wanted to move that to the beginning, I can do that. If I want to group by vendor, I'm now getting subtotals by vendor, and I can still drill down and see which documents, came in for that particular vendor inside of here. We can actually even see more details, right? So on that particular, this will make it a little simpler. On that particular one, all right, we can see that there's 3 line items in that purchase order. If I click on this one, looks like there's 3 line items. And there's only 1 line item on that particular purchase order. So you have the capability, even though this is, could be live or archive, to how you interact with this data is really powerful. We can even do this across companies. So if I wanted to, I could check my second Business Central company in this case, and now I have the capability of it gives me one more column that tells me where it's coming from. So again, if we drug it up there, now I can see the transactions that are coming from Kronos EU versus Kronos US. We can still do, like, if we wanted to do by vendor. So now we have by company, by vendor. We can see everything that's inside of there. So some really powerful things on how we interact with that data. Additionally, I guess one more thing just to point out is that we can filter this data as much as you like. So there's no limitations on this, right? You can just keep mashing on this button as many times as makes sense. You get down to just the fields that you need. They don't even have to be on this list. They just have to be, part of the Business Central data, or again, in our case, we'll be talking about historical data in a second. But whatever it is, you can take that, you'll see all the different options, and we can restrict it down, save these as favorites. But let me show you one really big thing, I think, for being in the accounting world for over 25 years, is everybody uses like a between filter when they're working with dates. And it's a lot of work to keep changing it, going, okay, I want it for the first of December through the end of December, and then okay, I want it for the 1st of January through the end of January. right? Those kinds of things, people are always doing a between type statement, and you constantly have to change those favorites. Well, we studied really how people use it, and we have these comparisons in there, so I could actually just do the same thing and say, give me everything this month. And so now the current month that we're in, I can see all those values. Or again, it might be very valuable to see last month. So you save these as favorites, you quickly go back to them, and you don't have to keep changing dates all the time. You can pick this quarter, last quarter, this year, last year, this week, whatever it is, you have those capabilities built in. Okay, so that was just a quick little tutorial of going through PopDoc, but one of our focuses today is really how do I do that for historical data? So you can see in this case, instead of navigating through a bunch of the current Business Central data, or again, even in this case, I have some stuff coming from an external system called Shopify. We're focusing on this historical NAV data. And so in this case, if I wanted to, I could actually go ahead and pull some of my information in, so I could see the sales order lines inside of here. It looks like there's somebody has a favorite called Maddie's List. But if we hit just the default view on here, you'll see it's pulling information, and it's now doing it from the archive, right? It's coming from the data lake. It is not something that we turned off our SQL server, right? It's no longer on anymore, but we still have capability of hitting that nav system. We can still do the things that we had before, right? Where I could say, hey, I actually want these 3 columns. And so I'm still able to interact with the data that way. There we go. Looks like only one of them had information in. We can still do grouping. So it looks like I only have one numerical field on here right now. So if we were to group by, probably should have an item number on here or something like that. So probably the item number field. If we're going to group by the item number, I can now see that I'm getting some totals by line item. So just to let you know that you can make whatever list that you want available. This one only has a couple. Maybe you're focused primarily on the vendor side of things, right? Maybe you just want to have a couple lists to have the ledger entries and the payments or whatever it may be. But you have the capabilities if you need to pull in 100 different lists that you have that makes sense for your business, you can pull in all of that history. I wanted to show one more thing, is that we can also embed this inside of a customer, a vendor, an item, whatever it may be. We can pull that contextual information. So instead of pulling all of the transactions, for all 20 years of history or whatever it may be, we can give you the capability of embedding it right inside of, in this case, a customer page, like I said, or it could be a vendor. And what we're doing is we're able to pass in the ID so that we can filter out the data and only show their records. So we might have thousands and thousands or millions of records in the overall list, but in this case, I only have 125 for this. Now, you'll have to use your imagination. This one is actually pulling data from a couple different places. It is pulling data from the live Business Central system, right? So these are records that our buddy Aaron Fitz has put inside of there. But it's also, in this case, I do apologize, it's not NAV in this example. It happens to come from GP data that was archived to the data lake. But we have that combination of these two. Excuse me, I'm just going to get a sip of water real quick. All right, thank you. So yeah, we have this combination, or we call it a merge list. That's a capability of PopDoc that we can pull that data together, so you can now see in one place both history and new information without ever leaving BC. So that's one of the first things I wanted to show you. So let's go back here, and I want to talk a bit more about how we make that happen, because we're going to talk about the PopDoc Data Lake upload tool now. And this is really a tool that's going to allow us to connect to our NAV system on-prem and move that data to the data lake and prepare it for use in just like you saw, where we had embedded on inside of the Business Central interface. So Let's talk about a couple of things in here. It does not require you to open up your SQL Server to the world, and which means that, again, we don't have to punch holes in the firewall. You don't have to open that port, don't have to have a gateway installed or anything like that. It allows us to hook into the data and then publish it to the data lake. It will allow us to do two different things. So we'll have a bunch of nav lists out of the box. I'm going to show you one thing today. It's not complete because it's coming out by the end of the year. So there's just a couple of things in there, but you're going to basically be able to pull any kind of nav list that has the combination of, for example, we might have sales transactions, and we actually want the header and the line all in one piece. Well, we have a list that's already done that for you. You don't necessarily have to just go to the tables. But since I'm talking about tables, we do also have that as an option, because for many people, this is really the insurance policy where you're going to be moving that data so that you can turn off that SQL Server at some point in the future, and then again, still be able to access absolutely everything inside of BC without having to, again, go in an emergency and go fire up that server again. So that's our goal, is that to allow you to turn off that server and still be able to access absolutely everything inside of there. And when we say everything, we don't mean just the standard Microsoft tables, right? We know sometimes third parties may have additional tables, or again, maybe even you or your customer has created some entirely separate custom tables that might be sitting in one of those databases. We will move everything in there for you to the data lake. All right, the second part is, after we connect to it, is how do we go about moving it? So again, this is running in your environment, and it does not need to have a dedicated server. So a couple things: it does not need to run on the SQL Server. It doesn't even need to run on a server class machine. It can run from a workstation, but it will be running on your network, because that's where you have access to that SQL Server. The second part here is that we're going to be moving data as fast as we can. And there's kind of two parts to that, right? We're going to be extracting it in the most efficient way, and then we'll be uploading it as fast as we can. But let's talk about that just very briefly. Sometimes when you were talking about 20 plus years of nav data, you might be talking about some really large databases. I saw one the other day that was 1.5 terabytes, and so that's a fairly large database. So when we talk about extracting all the data out of there, right, we're running SQL queries essentially to move that data out of there into a file that can be uploaded to the data lake. So just letting you know that it's going to run. And again, if you have 10 gigabytes of data versus 1.5 terabytes of data, it's obviously going to take a lot longer. So 10 gigabytes, you might be done in 15, 20 minutes, whereas it could get into hours as you get up into the hundreds of gigs. And again, it could potentially go into more than one day if you had a system with a large amount of data. The second part is the upload process, right? It is actually using your internet connection to upload it to the Azure Data Lake. And so sometimes people's upload speeds are not as fast as their download speeds. And so that is certainly something that goes into the equation. So anyway, just to kind of give you a little bit of guidance on if they have just a small amount of data versus 1.5 terabytes is more on the larger side for sure. The other part to this product is it's going to give you the capability of fixing any errors, right? So if we bring in lists on the nav side of things, is you might have a couple that fail. And so maybe there's something that maybe you had some kind of a calculation that was in there, and maybe you haven't looked at it in 10 years, and that particular list failed or something like that. You have the opportunity to go back and say, hey, we need to fix that calculation, and yes, that's data we want, and we'll fix it and then run just that one list again. So let's get into a demo of what this looks like. Okay, so this is the PopDoc Data Lake upload tool. You'll see that it does work across multiple products. And like I said, I'm just giving you a sneak preview of the nav one today. I just have the part where we talk about copying tables. So what does this mean? Well, first of all, you're going to log into your PopDoc account. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm logging in. And if what's happening is it's going to see all of the accounts I have access to. So I happen to have access to way too many accounts. So there we go. You can see this is the one I actually want to log into. So now once I log in here, it's going to ask me which data lake I'm going to be selecting to move it to. So again, all of that's configured in my PopDoc account. And then I just need to make sure that we have everything checked out here. So it's going to my nav data lake and this container. So I'll connect to that now. Now the final part here is we're connecting to the SQL server that houses our nav. And mine has an external facing look, but most people, it might just be like, SQL Server or something along those lines. So whatever it is, it does not need to be accessible to the world because you're going to be running this process on-prem in your network. Now, in this example that I have just the tables, this is basically the entire database backup. So I would be pointing to the nav database where I have this stored. And then you're going to connect with a SQL user. And it does not need to be SA. In my example, I'm being lazy, but it just needs to be a user that has access to that database and the tables inside of it, and then more importantly, access to sys objects so that we can read all that metadata, whether we need to know if that customization that you added inside of there, if it should be a string field or a currency or a date field, so all that kind of stuff is in there. And then the last part we would do is we would just connect to this database, and then we can start the process to archive all of the tables. So what it'll look like is on the other end of things, if we go back into PopDoc, once it's complete, is I will start having, I'll have it in my Azure Data Lake, I'll have all of the lists. Now again, we didn't run a process that actually created the lists yet because that's still just under the last stages of development and testing. But some of the options that I ran the other day to move all the tables over is right inside of here. So if we choose add file, for example, to go into this connector, you can see I've moved all of these nav files. And again, what's kind of interesting inside of here is I did it for 3 different companies in this example, and so that's why you might see these files 3 times inside of here. But this was the archive of everything inside of here, so now I have access to go hit any table. Like I said, most people are probably going to use the lists because those are a little more user friendly, I think, because they already have things joined together, right? Like I said, if you need to pull something from the sales header, the sales line, and maybe the customer, we have all those things joined together for you so that you have all the meaningful information in one place. But really the key is once it's inside of here, once we have all of our nav data that's ran through that tool, we can do whatever we want with it. So we have those lists I talk about, or again, here's an example of where I might do a merge list, right? So this is a custom list. I say, hey, I want some data from the history that's sitting in the data lake that used to be nav data. And then I also want to join the live Business Central data in there. Or I should be careful saying join. A merge is essentially like a union. If you came from the SQL world, it's just saying give me everything from here and also give me everything from here. And so that's the beautiful part, is where we can pull those custom lists in together, and then we can make them available inside of Business Central. So I want to show, I guess in the last couple minutes here, I want to show just how easy it is to make that accessible inside of Business Central. If I go into this connector, for example, and you can see I have lists. So I have lists from all kinds of places, right? I have from, GP migrations, NAV migrations, SL migration. So I can create any kind of group I want, and I can have subgroups under each of those groups. But then I just go, hey, I want to add new lists inside of here. So if I was going to go to my NAV data lake, and if I wanted to go into the data lake connector, you can see I only had 3 lists in there. So if I wanted to pull that particular list, it is now available to see right inside of Business Central. And so if we went back into Business Central and refreshed, all right, there we go, Business Central coming back. You can now see, here we go, here's that last list that I added. And now this should be showing us information right from, I didn't have any default fields, so it's trying to pull every field in there. I should have defined some default fields, so we had those on the customer. But just to show you, in a matter of minutes, you can be displaying the historical type data anywhere inside of there. Okay, just to kind of wrap up here, what this tool allows you to do is securely connect to your Dynamics NAV data without opening up any part of your network to the outside world, because it runs internally and then pushes to the cloud. It allows you to quickly and easily, right? You don't need to be a developer for anything that we talked about. Like I said, even the AL code that's generated behind the scenes for embedding in any of those pages, you don't have to write that. That is just something that PopDoc does for you. And so it provides that mechanism to not only move it to the data lake, but really the second or the last part is, how can I access it inside of Business Central? So now you have a way of hitting all of that history that's not, bogging down the new Business Central tables. This is sitting in an Azure Data Lake, which is really cost-effective way of storing that, and you can access it at any time. All right, let's get into any questions that we have out there. So I would encourage you, if you want to get your question answered today, just to put it into the questions pane, and we'll get through as many as we can. All right, so first one in here is asking if, or what does a Azure Data Lake cost? There's a lot of variables in this. Again, it's going to depend on how much data you're storing and how often you access it. But for most people, and I'll just give this example, if you have less than 100 gigabytes of data out there and you're only hitting it 10,000 times a month, most people are going to be paying less than $20 a month for their Microsoft Azure Data Lake. Yep, good question. Okay, another question is, what versions of NAV will this work with? This is a tool that will allow us to go back quite a ways. So we have people that have, let me just give you a couple examples of NAV ones that we've worked with so far. We have anything that's, obviously like 2013 NAV and Business Central on up is going to be no problems whatsoever. As we get into some of those older ones, we as long as they're SQL based, then this tool will allow us to archive everything in there. We might have to tweak a couple of lists because there's some columns and everything have changed in there, but you'll be able to use that. And then if we go into a version of NAV, and I know we've already ran into a couple of them that is pre-SQL Server, so on the C side database, what we are recommending there is that you extract out the data to CSV, and then we can upload those to the data lake and then make that available inside of Business Central. Okay, looks like I am running out of time here, so I want to thank everybody for their time that you spent with us today. If you do come up with some additional questions at a later time, please email sales@e1solutions.com and they will hunt down the right people for you. So thanks everyone, and have a wonderful day.